go ahead and get started. It's time. Hi, everybody. Am I loud? Am I too loud? Really? All right. I'm Jonathan Mayer, and I'm on the music team with Sony PlayStation, based here in the Bay Area at our Bridgepoint studio, just down the road. And I wanted to give a talk today that's kind of a high-level, almost sort of philosophical look at just paradigms in the design of a score, especially for a narrative-based game. It's something that a lot of you who know me know I like to talk about a lot. And it's something that over the years I've spent a lot of time thinking about, obviously because of my job, but also just in an effort to sort of improve the way we do things. So it's kind of a best practices exploration. It's meant to just provoke discussion and maybe get folks out there talking about doing things differently. Maybe you already do things in some of the ways I'm going to show you, and that's great too. But it's basically just, to date, the kind of sum total of a lot of experiences I've had over the past 11 years working at PlayStation. In that time, I have been the music project lead for about 20 titles, and I've probably touched about 40 or so games. Our team's probably produced about 70 or 80 games in the time I've been there. So this is just kind of coming from that place. Before I go any further, I need to point out that I am going to be showing a lot of examples from The Last of Us, and so that's impossible to do without a lot of gore and cursing, and cursing from a 14-year-old girl. So I'm also going to spoil the entire game. So it's been out for a long time, so shame on you if you're here and that's a problem. But that's my disclaimer. So I kind of jokingly like to ask this question. I was going to put a picture of a stork up there, but I'm using art from the game. So again, like I said, the intent of the talk is to just look at how we get from, hey, we're making this game, to the end product. And I want to stay high level and just look at what happens along the way. So one of the things I wanted to, did I just cut out? I just got quieter. Good, that's probably good. I talk really loud. So. Before I go any further, I wanted to just see what the makeup of the audience was, because we're on the design track and the audio track here. So how many design track folks are in the room? Any? Oh, that's pretty good. Cool. Awesome. I've done this before to try to have a split design and audio thing, and no design people came, and someone told me if I put the title The Last of Us in the title of the talk that you guys would show up. So it worked a little bit. And then is everyone else on the audio track? Audio track people? How many of you are composers? Audio directors? Or that kind of thing? Okay, cool. Well, hopefully this will give everybody some more tools to communicate with each other. And that's the whole point of this talk, is that we do a better job collectively of discussing these things at a high level throughout a project. And I think with the ultimate goal being that we do something on a project, and by we I mean all of us here, that connects with our audience in a lasting and meaningful way. That's the most important thing, I think, about what we're trying to do. And with music, it's tough because you have to start early on a game project, and there's not a lot of game at that point, if there's any. And what you're being asked to do is basically create a collection of assets. And I think that's how a lot of people look at the output that comes from their music contractor, their composer, their music team, or whatever. But there's craft going on there too, and it's an artistic expression that's meant to do something to someone, preferably on an emotional level. And so I want to talk about how we make those ends meet. And that's really the intended takeaway here. So a few years ago, as we were finishing The Last of Us, I was thinking about this a lot, and I started just spamming a bunch of people I know with like really simplistic questions about music, and this was one of them. And it's one of these questions that, like, you read that, and I think most people, especially with a music background, read that and have a really quick answer. And that's what I wanted to get from people. And I was just curious if what I thought and what I had thought all these years was consistent with what other people thought, especially people who weren't coming at it from the music side. And just to kind of check myself and the people I was working with on what we were supposed to be doing. Because you can get in a groove and just, forget about stuff like that. And fortunately, the answers were pretty consistent and relatively consistent with what I thought. These were, I got a couple hundred of these, but I kind of broke it down into just the ones that were most consistent. And then I sort of broke that down further into the ones that were really the most consistent. And, so supporting the narrative seems to be the big thing here, and that word support came up over and over and over again. But also there's this idea of connecting and heightening some emotional experience. So again, going back to what I was saying about being tasked with creating a collection of assets, that doesn't seem to jive. Getting a list of assets that need to be made doesn't always seem to jive with accomplishing this big emotional task, doing something to someone emotionally. So again, I thought that was really interesting, and we took it a step further with some of the folks I work with, and we started talking about how that relates to linear media. And this came up in talking with some of the folks at Naughty Dog and some of the other developers we work with, Sucker Punch. And, I think it's a really valuable thing when you're doing this to go back and look at movies and TV shows that do this well, not because that's necessarily what we're trying to do, but because there are all these techniques that have existed for a really long time, longer than our industry has, that work. And I think, we can look at that and learn a lot about what they're doing in that medium that informs what we're going to do, and also what we can do better. And I think a lot of things will come up here when we look at some of these examples that touch on sort of both ends of that spectrum. And some of the big things that come up are like the fact that in a film or in a linear piece of media, one of the big hurdles I think we face a lot is that you can anticipate, exactly what's going to happen and when. And in a game, that's pretty rare. And like one example I like to look at a lot when we're talking about this is a scene from The Two Towers that hopefully everybody's seen, when our heroes are escorting the people from Rohan to Helm's Deep, and they get attacked by orcs and wargs in the middle of that situation. And the music in that scene is basically, the cue that plays there is basically one giant build-up to the battle. And then the music cuts out when the battle starts. And that's something that I think philosophically we need to look at more in games, because we're basically, a lot of game music systems are sort of like this binary or trinary things where we have a few levels of intensity, and we just say, we're tied to maybe AI behavior or some other sort of state-based thing. And I don't know what the answer is to this, because it's a design question. It's something that, if you're in the process of designing a game and it's early on, you have to have technology that supports these kind of things. And generally, I think one of the problems we face is that this type of technology comes online late, and it's really hard to do anything about it other than sort of tie yourself to whatever was predetermined there in the game in the first place. And then the other thing that I think is really interesting about film that we're missing still a lot in games, not across the board, is the angularity of action music. We do have a lot of action music in games. And if you pay close attention to what's going on in a film, again, they have the advantage of knowing where the cuts are going to be and where the hits are going to be in the action. And I think it's an interesting question to pose to everyone here of how we can do a better job of that. How do we get more granular connectivity? It's something, and people have said this a lot, it's something that arguably we did better in games back before streaming audio became the norm. And when MIDI was how we scored things, I think that we had a lot more immediacy with what was going on in the game and what happened in the score. But we have a huge advantage when we're making games because we can blur the line between the participant, like between being a viewer and being a participant in what's going on. And I think this idea of creating a lasting emotional impression on people, for us when we're designing these things becomes, I mean, not to make too big a deal of it, but it's almost like a responsibility we have because we're selling these expensive pieces of media that we want people to really connect to and have an experience with, and we can go a lot deeper. And so I want to kind of challenge all of us to think that way. In doing that, the same email that I sent out to a bunch of people asking the question about what they thought music should do, I asked them this question about games, and I confined it to the last 10 years, and this was about a year and a half ago, so if your game came out this year, sorry. But again, I just wanted to know, like, I just think it's really healthy to check in and see what other people think about this stuff. And a lot of answers. I mean, it was amazing. And I made sure if it was stuff I wasn't familiar with that I went and checked it out. And it's amazing how much great work people are doing in this area already. I had 4 answers that came up a lot, like much more than the rest. And these are they. With Journey and The Last of Us, it was kind of all over the place. It was mostly the whole game in both cases. The arriving in Mexico moment, I hope everybody's familiar with what I'm talking about, in Red Dead Redemption, is a really interesting example. And then from BioShock, a lot of people brought up the Welcome to Rapture moment when you first arrive in Rapture. So this brings me to kind of the point of this talk, which is, so when I saw that, I wanted to go back and look at The Last of Us, because while I was working on it, I wasn't really thinking about this, especially towards the end, and just try to figure out, you know, if there was anything we did that was different from other things we've done that made it stand out, and how we could play that forward into things we do after that. So if you go to the beginning of a project, we all know that, like, starting something is hard, and especially if it's a new IP and you're starting from scratch. And I think the way most projects I've ever worked on start is with some sort of style guide, and that's usually a collection of music that folks think is the right way to approach that game musically, and then you kind of go from there. And this might be a semantic thing, but I've become a big fan of trying to focus on the word tone. And I think it really matters, because when you're listening to a bunch of music, I think we collectively, and especially music people, tend to get caught up thinking about the genre and the instrumentation and things like that. And what we're really trying to do is push these emotional buttons. And so we've really been trying to move to a model where you create like a tone map. And this isn't just important for music, it's important for the whole game. And I hope if you're designing a game that you're thinking that way, because it can be very tough. I mean, it can be pretty easy, I think, to misunderstand the tone of the thing you're working on, and to make sure that there's alignment between. It's a big challenge to make sure there's alignment between what you think the tone should be of something you're doing, whether it's music or the whole game or whatever, and what other people actually perceive it to be. And everything has to be consistent. So, the dialogue and the music and the acting and the color palette that you use and the way the environments are designed and the art, I mean, all this stuff has to work together to create the proper space to communicate these really complex ideas. So in doing that, I think for a narrative-based game, I think it's really important to think of your themes as threads in the narrative. And I think it's a very common thing, especially in games, to tie thematic material to things like places. And I think that works for certain kind of games really well, and it can work in a narrative game, but the really important things that are gonna drive the emotional tone of your project hopefully can exist outside of that and be woven throughout the story. So we started The Last of Us this way. And again, I mean, at the time, I didn't know this was what we were doing. This was just kind of how it played out. And our director, Neil Druckmann, had a really crystal clear idea about this, which makes everything really easy. That's not to say the whole project was easy, but this part of it started off with a lot of focus. And so we have 4 pillars here, and we tried really hard not to deviate from those. And a few other things came up throughout the project, but really everything we did was focused in one of these boxes, and there's a little overlap here and there, and I'll show an example of that. But so we have like Joel and Ellie, and that's not a character theme, it's their relationship. It's what happens to Joel when he loses his daughter, and then the journey he goes on coming to grips with that, his relationship with Ellie, and then the eventual change in that relationship where she winds up taking care of him, and how they both grow through that, and her self-reliance that comes out of that, and all that stuff. The beauty side of it was relative to the world, and this idea that nature has basically reclaimed the planet, and that Neil really wanted us to convey a sense of almost sort of majesty surrounding that, and that was a really important part of this world we were going to put people into. And then the bottom 2, I think, are pretty clear. Brutality specifically was separated from the horror and the terror of the infected, in that there was this idea that and it's really common, and I mean, it's a trope in all these sort of post-apocalyptic things, that the brutality that men and women do to each other in these situations was much more important than the other side of it, and that they were very separate things. And really, if you played through the game and you know the story, the infected are almost kind of background noise. They're just a setup for this. So here are a couple examples. The way we approach this, the other thing that's important to mention here is that Gustavo Santaolalla, who wrote the music for the game, got a hold of this and did a lot of work really early on. And a sort of running theme of this presentation is that all of this has to work. The only way all of this can work is with a lot of iteration, and everybody on both sides being willing to do it, a lot of patience from the people supporting the composer, and that gives the composer a lot of space to work and fail, and you know, try a lot of different things. So what Gustavo did early on was he took this information, he started working on a theme, and then he showed up to our second meeting with over an hour's worth of music. And I'd say probably 35 or 40 minutes of that went into the score as is. But what it did was it was like seeding a garden. I mean, basically everything in that first delivery became the seeds for everything else we did for the entire project. I don't think after that there was much thematically that was brand new. I think it all came from there. And we threw a lot of it out, and he was fine with that. But here's his first delivery of what became the main theme, and this was the hopeful melancholy side of things. And I think one of the things that's important to mention about this, too, as we go through it, is just how simple that is. Especially if you're a composer, and especially if you're just getting into this, I think there's so much tremendous power and value in being able to satisfy a tone, a style tone request like that in such a simple way. Because what it did was it gave all of us working on the project the ability to do a lot of things with that theme. It's extremely flexible, and there's no harmony even in what we just heard. And then he went even simpler for the Joel and Ellie thing, and this is what he gave us. And so we'll look at a bunch of examples where that melody was used and cast in a bunch of different ways throughout the story. Real quick before I move on from this idea of having tone pillars, I just wanted to look at one other project real quick. We look at Infamous Second Son, which was a radically different game to work on, but the same process worked really well on that game. And the pillars for the tone exercise are completely different. And on this project, it was interesting because it took a lot longer to satisfy these things. So on the one hand, we had Gustavo come in with The Last of Us and just go, here you go, and it was like more than enough. And on this project, we did a lot of work to get the director and the composers all in alignment on what all these things meant and how they were going to sound. And again, it's that point that the whole time there was just a lot of communication and collaboration. And I think one of the keys to this is not just having your composer be cool with doing a lot of iteration, but you on the design side have to be really engaged and giving them the kind of feedback that gets them pointed in the right direction. In the example of Gustavo's music, he didn't come in and say, this is the theme for Hopeful Melancholy, and this is the theme for Joel and Ellie. He just gave us a bunch of music, and then we collaborated with the director, and he was the one who really said, this sounds like this to me, and this sounds like this. And I don't think these things work as well as we're showing here without that two-way engagement, and I'm going to say that a lot, probably. But here's a quick example of what ended up speaking to the freedom versus security thing for the team on at Sucker Punch on Infamous. So that's a really different space to be working in, sort of genre-wise and stuff. But just a good example. So you've established your tone, and I just wanted to put this up here. This is fake. I just made this for fun. But I think this is extremely common, and I don't know for you as composers out there, but what I hear more and more is that most projects, once they get to this point, wind up handing over a list like this to their composer and a bunch of, maybe some art assets and some video and stuff like that. And it's like, okay, here's your scope of work. Go for it. And that's great. But I think you missed the boat on this whole concept of seeding your garden and growing something that's really special. And also, I mean, we all know how game development goes. You make a lot of decisions really early on working in this paradigm that you just don't know if they're going to be right or not by the time you get to the end of a project. So I think it's much more important to think of this seeding paradigm, and I want to just stick with Infamous for a second and play a couple examples where iteration was really important, where we had kind of a hard time getting the sound nailed down. Whereas, like I said, with The Last of Us, it was super straightforward. And on Infamous, there was this notion that, because it was set in Seattle, there was going to be this certain kind of production that sort of, they didn't want it to be, Seattle grunge music, but they wanted it to somehow sort of speak to that, and that Delson's character would kind of have that in his DNA. And so the composers did a lot of work with our team and the director to sort of figure out what that was going to sound like. And here's an example of something Mark Canham did really early in the project. And I've got 3 versions of it because it went through 3 pretty different stages. But you can hear the seeds are still there. And when we got that, our director loved it. I mean, he felt like mood and tone-wise, it spoke to a bunch of specific moments in the story that he wanted to use it for, but it was kind of way off in terms of this vibe we wanted for the project. So we bounced a lot of ideas around, and we decided we had to have live players on it, and that was the intent all along. So we went with basically just what was a rock band. I mean, the only difference was we had an electric cellist, but we had drums, bass, and guitar. And we were like, hey, let's just take this thing and produce it in the studio with a bunch of players like a rock track. And this is the mix that came out of that. And the response when we turned that in was like, oh, great, now you guys are going to score my game with classic rock. That's awesome. And Nate Fox, the director on the game, was, felt like that was sort of almost a step back from the really simple thing we started with. So luckily, Mark, the composer, had this great idea that he was just going to take that, and he thought he understood at that point what Nate wanted. And he just took all the stems from all this experimentation we'd done in the studio, took it home, worked on it in his studio again for a while, and he sent this back. and then from that point, we had a suite of music that could be cut up and used in in a variety of situations. And so I think approaching it as sort of suite-based stuff, especially early on, goes a long way to sort of satisfying that queueless mentality with a lot of material, but giving you much more flexibility throughout your project and a lot more consistency when we talk about these thematic threads that you weave through the score. So going back to The Last of Us, notice I didn't talk at all about the brutality or the horror pieces because we didn't really get those in that 60-minute dump of music early on. And so that became a real focus after that, like as we got into the project and how to do that, because so much of the game, you know, when you just look at the sheer amount of time you spend playing that game, really most of it tonally it takes place in those two pillars, and that the first two we talked about are primarily a lot of the cutscenes and some of the like really specific kind of gameplay moments that happen around them. So we learned that Neil, especially for the action in the game, really just wanted these like low pulsing things and pads and low percussion, stuff that never really ever got too big. And so we went crazy recording a bunch of percussion. And some of you might be looking at this and going, wow, that looks really expensive, and it was, and thinking, you know, maybe you can't do that on a smaller project, but you can definitely do this, which is basically free and sounds pretty cool too. And that was part of the same thing, like just trying to find sounds that worked, that sort of broke the mold and propped up these pillars we were looking to get taken care of. And then we took it a step further, and we collaborated with an orchestrator. We put Gustavo together with an orchestrator, and they started working on this really strange ensemble that was all low woodwinds and low strings. We had no violas or violins, and all these really strange low woodwinds. We had a bass sax, a bass harmonica. It was a really weird ensemble. And the intention was to both take all the seeds he'd given us in his initial suites and create as much material as we could, because again, the game was still being made, and we just thought, hey, we'll just have all these options. Let's go crazy. And so they orchestrated these things all these different ways, and we recorded them. And then Gustavo took a lot of that material back and recorded more of himself on top of that, playing various instruments. And we also made a whole bunch of, because Neil liked pads and things like that so much, we decided to make our own so that the score had a really iconic sort of layer of menace that we could use throughout. And we recorded a bunch of really long, slow gestures with this ensemble, and then made custom sampler instruments out of them for Gustavo that he then used as his synths, basically, for the score. And this is an example of one of the sort of finished pieces after all that, the blowing on the PVC pipes and banging the drums and recording this ensemble. He came back with this. And so if you play through the game, I mean, that's, you know, experientially, that's probably, you probably hear more of that kind of stuff than you do the really iconic melodic stuff. But they're both really, really important, just in different ways. Which brings me to my favorite part of this whole discussion, which is why we have music, where we have it, when we have it, which is a question that I don't think you can ask too much when you're working on this stuff. Again, it's easy for these things to become systemic or mechanical, especially in a really big game like Infamous Second Son, where you have this massive open world experience, and you can't custom score everything that happens. But this concept of two-way collaboration between all the aspects of design on the game and the folks handling the music is really important. That example from Red Dead Redemption is one of my favorite examples because it's such a simple thing, and like so many people just freak out. I did too. I mean, when that happened to me when I was playing the game, I was elated. It was amazing. And it's, you know, I mean, they just sort of, they're just, I mean, the decision is like, okay, guy's just going to ride the horse for X number of minutes, and we're going to play this song, and nothing else is going to happen, and you can get off the horse, and you can walk around, but there's nothing systemically going on in the world at that moment, and it's a really simple, more or less free design choice as far as resources go. I mean, you don't really have to do anything. Your world's there. It's built. Just let the guy ride the horse and play this song. And it's remarkable, like, how much of an impact that has. So on the design side, you have to constantly be asking yourself if you're giving your music the opportunities it needs to be successful in this area. And really thinking about it early and often. And so now the piece that I played you that I said was the Joel and Ellie theme, it's called All Gone, from The Last of Us. I'm going to show a bunch of examples where that popped up throughout the score in different ways and just talk about how those happened. This is your last chance if you don't want to see a bunch of horrible, depressing, and sad things. So the first example was actually the last one we created, which was in the sequence where Joel loses his daughter at the beginning of the game. And this was an interesting collaborative moment for us because it was one of the last cutscenes we worked on. And the great thing about getting all this material early from Gustavo was that the video editor who put together all the cinematics at Naughty Dog was forbidden from using anything but that material. And I think it was his decision. I don't think he was actually forbidden, but they made a pact that he would only temp score anything with Gustavo's music, and then we cleaned up the edits. And when we couldn't make it work, Gustavo dove in with what Gustavo had already given us. He'd dive in and fix it, basically, and probably generally redo it. And this was one where they had kind of settled on an edit of a version of All Gone that he had done early on. And he saw it and was like, no, I have to redo this. And the team was like, but we really like it. And Gustavo was like, it didn't make me cry. I'm going to fix it. And and so he took it home, and this goes into the opening credits, which is also a really cool collaborative thing that went on with the design team, our creative services group, within our services group who made the opening credits, and some people on our team where they were basically passing this music edit back and forth of his original delivery of his main theme. So this all happens in one thing, so check it out.
We're almost there.
They're getting closer. Dad?
It's okay, baby. We're safe. We're safe. Hey, we need help.
Stop!
Please. No, it's my daughter. I think her leg's broken.
Stop right there!
Okay. We're not sick.
Got a couple of civilians in the outer perimeter. Please advise.
Daddy, what about Uncle Tommy?
We're gonna get you to safety and go back for him, okay?
Sir, there's a little girl. But... Yes, sir.
Listen, buddy, we've just been through hell. Okay, we just need... Oh, shit. Please don't. Oh, no. Move your hands, baby. I know, baby, I know. Listen to me, I know this hurts. You're gonna be okay, baby. Stay with me. I'm gonna pick you up. I know, baby, I know it hurts. Come on, baby, please. I know, baby, I know. Sarah. Baby. Don't do this to me, baby. Don't do this to me, baby. No. Please. Please.
The number of confirmed deaths has passed 200. The governor has called a state of emergency.
There are hundreds and hundreds of bodies lining the streets.
Panic spread worldwide after a leaked report from the World Health Organization showed that the latest vaccination tests have failed.
With the bureaucrats out of power, we can finally take the necessary steps.
Los Angeles is now the latest city to be placed under martial law. All residents are required to report to their designated quarantine. Riots have continued for a third consecutive day, and winter rations are at an all-time low.
A group calling themselves the Fireflies have claimed responsibility for both attacks.
Their public charter calls for the return of all branches of government.
Demonstrations broke out following the execution of 6 more alleged Fireflies.
You can still rise with us. Remember, when you're lost in the darkness, look for the light. Believe in the Fireflies.
So we felt like that was a really powerful, obviously, I mean, the cutscene's hardcore, but I mean, when Gustavo turned that in, it was the first time I'd seen a bunch of dudes in a recording studio cry. Everybody sitting around in the room was just like, oh, God. You know, it was great to have that opportunity to pass those things back and forth like that. I'm going to skip over here just because we're running a little long. And then the same theme comes up again much later in the game when Ellie is basically, the tables have been turned and Joel's mortally wounded. Ellie's taking care of Joel. And this is the moment when Ellie kills David. And this was another big collaborative turning point because they actually replaced all the sound in this cutscene with music after the fact, because they just felt like every time they started sort of taking the rest of the mix down relative to music, that it got more and more powerful emotionally. And finally, they cut out all the dialogue. I mean, there's a bunch of dialogue in here that you never even hear.
Stop!
Fucking touch me!
It's me! Look! It's me.
He tried to...
Oh, baby girl. It's okay.
Joel.
It's okay.
So now you're probably sitting there thinking, you know, a few minutes ago you just said games are different than movies and all these examples are just movies. And you're right. So let's look at some examples from gameplay where this worked really well. Shortly after that, there's this moment that from the very beginning of the project was super important to Neil, where Ellie was going to go through this experience and then emerge and have this, you know, she was basically broken at this point. And Joel's worried that she's kind of beyond repair. And then they have this encounter with these giraffes, and it's kind of this, a little bit of a rekindling of the little girl. Like we see her sort of behaving like a little girl again. And this was a piece of music that Gustavo turned into that first batch. And you'll hear his original delivery late in this scene. It's just a solo electric piano thing. And everything else you hear is something we made in those various recording sessions I talked about, not knowing exactly what we were going to do with it. And it's all woven together here pretty seamlessly. You're actually going to hear four different pieces of music throughout the gameplay here.
You'd use that ladder. Here we go. Ellie. Ellie.
What?
The ladder. Come on.
Right.
What is it? Ellie! Ellie!
You gotta see this.
What is it? What the hell is...
Are you kidding me? Come on, hurry up.
Sam Hill.
You see this? Don't scare it.
I won't.
What are you doing?
It's all right. Come here. There you go. Hurry up. Come on.
Hey there. So fucking cool. Aw, where's it off to? Here, come on, let's go.
Slow down, kiddo.
Hurry up, come on. Oh, man. Wow. Look at those things.
So, is everything you were hoping for?
It's its ups and downs. But you can't deny the view, though.
We don't have to do this. You know that, right?
What's the other option?
Go back to Tommy's. Just be done with this whole damn thing.
After all we've been through. Everything that I've done. It can't be for nothing.
Funny, I kept trying to put music in the end of that, and Neil wouldn't let me. I think he was right. But we fought about it a lot. I'm going to skip a couple examples here real quick, just because I'm short of time. But lastly, I just wanted to show this scene from the end of The Last of Us. And I've told this story before, but this was kind of, for me, this is kind of the ultimate expression of what I've been trying to share today, which is that we worked out these emotional tent poles early on. We created a bunch of material, and I think on every project that we work this way on, we wind up with like at least one piece of music that we're all like, that's amazing, and we have no idea what to do with it. And we had this version of the All Gone theme that was fully orchestral from that session we did that I showed you the picture of. And Neil was like, man, this is beautiful. Gustavo put a bunch of time into, sort of working it out on the stage with the players. And Neil was like, yeah, we'll never use that. That doesn't fit in the game. And then towards the end of the game, when Joel makes the decision to basically, screw all of humanity to save Ellie's life and take her out of the operating room where they're going to sort of extract the cure that's growing on her brain and kill her in the process, as he's carrying her out of the lab, Scott Hanow, who does our music implementation on site at Naughty Dog, said, that's where we should play that piece. And Neil was like, no, it doesn't fit there. And they got in a pretty good battle over this. And so it was the end of a week where Scott was coming back home up here and then going back down there later. And so what Scott decided to do, and in that scene there was a lot of fighting, so it was kind of a battle scene. Like you picked her up and you walked out of the operating room, and then you had like a pistol under her body, and you had to like fight your way out with this constricted move set because you were carrying her. And Neil was like, that music doesn't fit there. So Scott waited until he was about to leave Friday. He checked it in, and he left, which is the passive-aggressive solution to, or it's aggressive-aggressive, I guess. But and this awesome thing happened where there were some folks working over the weekend. They heard it, and the designers actually started changing the gameplay there because they're listening to this piece of music. They're playing the game. And so they started changing the behavior of the enemies. They had them back off a little bit. Then the audio director got involved and started messing with the mix. And here's the end result.
Sweet Jesus.
Doctor? What are you doing in here? I won't let you take her. Don't come any closer.
No! Fucking animal!
Carrie, shut the hell up!
Come on, baby girl. I got you. I got you. Oh, shit.
And so, I mean, they even, after that all got done, they even timed the elevator ride to the end of the piece of music, which was an awesome little touch that the design team put on that at the end. So, again, just to recap, I think this is just summing all this up, I just put together this list of, I call them aspirations, but things that I hope we collectively can try to do when we're telling a story like this, because I think we have the ability to do this in a more powerful way than most other forms of media. And hopefully with some of these examples, you guys see that too, if you didn't already. And I ran kind of late, so I just have a couple minutes for questions. But that's all I have, so thanks for listening. I have like a minute if anybody has a question. That guy.
I don't hear myself, but... So obviously the approach really worked for this game. I could see myself, if I was in charge of the music system, my producer being like, this isn't planned enough, you need to plan it, all the cues, you need to plan it. So did you have some sort of planning, like an overall number of minutes or hours that you'd be like, okay, as long as we get like 2 hours of music, we know we're covered?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if you didn't hear it, the question is basically how we plan for scope. So if we don't have a set cue list going into it, how do we know how much music we're going to get? How do we keep the producers off our back, basically, in that situation, so they know we're going to score their game? And the answer to that is yes. I mean, we go into it knowing the length of the game, roughly, and knowing how much music we were going to need to tackle that. Our team makes a lot of derivative material from the stuff we get from the composer, and so that went a long way. So we probably wound up with probably about a little over 2 hours of source material overall for the game, and then we probably made 7 or 8 hours of material out of that in terms of editorial work. Time for one more question?
So I like to break games, figure out how they work. The draft scene in particular was one that I kept doing over and over to figure out when the instruments came in, when they came out. How do you plan for players doing stuff that you wouldn't necessarily expect? Like if I didn't follow the giraffe, that cello line would probably loop to the end of time, but how do you make it sound smooth and try and predict what I'm going to do as a player?
It's interesting. That's a great question, and we spend a lot of time trying to figure out the corner cases like that, trying to figure you out. Yeah, well, you know, it's funny because we bring that stuff up a lot, and I'd ask Neil those questions on the game. You know, we'd have a plan, and I'd say, Neil, what about the guy who just like stands here? And Neil would go, screw that guy.